It's widely believed in the industry that Aaron Judge is going to choose a team at the winter meetings. And guess what? The winter meetings have officially kicked off in San Diego. So we'll get into where the Giants stand next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, essentially we're going to preview what could be one of the biggest moments in the history of this franchise. We're setting you up for where the Giants stand right now as the winter meetings in San Diego have officially kicked off. Teams and agents and all that started arriving in San Diego over the weekend, and we got going last night. There was some Hall of Fame stuff, Barry Bonds not getting in, spoiler alert, which we'll get into later. But the big story for the San Francisco Giants is where do they stand with Aaron Judge? And the latest on Aaron Judge is essentially this has been a pretty hard free agent to read. There have not been a lot of leaks. There have certainly been virtually zero leaks coming out of the Giants side of things. The only way we really got information about Judge even visiting the Giants was that video that came out of Judge arriving at a San Francisco hotel. And then we got reports immediately afterwards, and then a couple days afterwards, essentially confirming that they did in fact have a visit. And then we've heard Alex Pavlovich and others. I've heard Dave Flemming on KNBR, Dave Flemming, the radio and TV voice of the Giants, one of them. And essentially, many people have said, Rich Aurelia said that the meeting with Aaron Judge went very well. We've heard reports that Judge's meetings with the Yankees have gone very well. And so it is not clear exactly where things stand, but the expectation in the industry is that he very well could pick a team in the next couple of days here. It could be today, it could be tomorrow, it could be possibly Wednesday, but the meetings wrap up on Wednesday morning. And so for the Giants, if they come away with Aaron Judge, that sets off a whole ripple effect for what do they need to do for the rest of the offseason. They still would have work to do. There's no doubt about it. There's no way they could just sign Aaron Judge and call it an offseason. But what if they didn't get Judge? What would they do in that case? And in that case, I think that they would immediately have to pivot to their next top option, who I believe is Carlos Correa. Based on just my own kind of internal evaluations of the market, of the players who are available, I came to the conclusion for me that Carlos Correa is the next best option outside of Aaron Judge. You could make a case in some ways that he's a better long-term possible, like he could end up being a better value throughout the course of a contract. And by value, I don't just mean like a bargain. I mean, he's much younger. He's almost 3 years younger than Aaron Judge, and they figure for whatever reason to get a similar number of years, 8, 9, 10 years. And so I don't know, for me personally, the Giants have so few payroll commitments starting in 2024. Their payroll right now is not particularly high as it is. But if you look at 2024 and 2025, there's like virtually nothing on the books. And so you very much could, in my opinion, make it work where you add an Aaron Judge and you still go to a Carlos Correa. But I just think, like, with a Judge decision potentially coming down here soon, say you get that announcement and your heart sinks and it says Aaron Judge is going back to the Yankees. I think that from the Giants' perspective, I'm sure that they've already gone deep down the road with some of these top shortstop free agents. Trey Turner is also a fit, but there's been kind of widespread reporting that he prefers to play on the East Coast. And also reporting that Trey Turner has met with the Padres multiple times. So maybe, and I think that the Dodgers would have interest in bringing Trey Turner back. So the expectation is that these winter meetings could be a frenzy. And we already saw some activity today. Justin Verlander agreeing to a 2-year, $87 essentially $1 million deal with the New York Mets. And so the starting pitching market has been on fire, and Carlos Rodon is kind of the next domino to fall, it would seem. And these short-term, like high AAV guys like Verlander and DeGrom and Kershaw much earlier in the offseason, and some others, Zach Eflin came off the board. There have been a lot of starters who have moved, but the top of the market position players haven't. But like I'm saying, I think Aaron Judge would just be a major, major domino to fall. And if he were to leave the Yankees, if he were to go back to the Yankees, I think it would be important for the Giants to move relatively quickly to try to close a deal virtually with Carlos Correa is how I feel about it. And there seems to be expectation within the industry that may be what they would actually do. And so I think the odds are pretty high that they end up with one of Aaron Judge or Carlos Correa. Reports from Alex Pavlovich, among others, like I mentioned with Dave Flemming, they basically are conveying that the Giants are optimistic. Dave Flemming was on KNBR with FP Santangelo a few days ago, and he conveyed that essentially the Giants feel like they're in a good position and that they are going to be at a dollar amount that makes the decision up to Aaron Judge about where does he want to be. And that is what we've been saying all along. I don't really think it's going to come down to one team just blew the other team away. I mean, if anybody blows anybody away, it might be the Giants blowing away the Yankees, but the Yankees would probably have the chance to match what the Giants are doing. But Dave Flemming conveyed that he believes that the Giants' offer is going to be so good that it's going to come down to, does Judge want to remain a Yankee or does he want to come home and play for the San Francisco Giants? And hopefully we have an answer, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, but soon. The expectation is that by the end of the winter meetings, Aaron Judge is going to make a decision, and that decision very well could be that he ends up on the San Francisco Giants. So we will have an emergency podcast immediately upon any news. But some other news in the sport coming out over the last few days: Bryan Reynolds, the fateful poor decision by the previous front office of the Giants to trade Reynolds to the Pirates for Andrew McCutchen, very much backfired. But Reynolds now has requested a trade from the Pirates. Should the Giants be interested, what would it take? We'll get into it in just a minute. But before we do, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We've got it all at BetOnline. And it was so interesting that when they first came out with odds for where Aaron Judge was going to land, it said, if not Yankees. And then the Giants were like the 9th most likely team. We said, hey, that's a really kind of misread of the market. And pretty shortly thereafter, they came out with updated odds, and the Giants were number 1 in terms of if he were to leave the Yankees. And then we said, hey, that's still, because the implied odds were only 33% for the Giants in that case if he left New York. Seems like if he leaves New York, the Giants were at least 50% over the rest of the league, and maybe closer to 2/3 or more. And they updated them again and now have the Giants as the odds-on favorites to land Aaron Judge. So just really interesting stuff that you can check out all off-season long and during the season, of course, as well. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. All right, as promised, we are going to get into this news about Bryan Reynolds. I'm also constantly going to be refreshing my Twitter account as we record this episode, because there's nothing better than finishing an episode and then about 20 minutes later, or during the episode, if you're not looking at Twitter, something happens that renders your episode completely useless. It's a little bit of what those of you who thankfully listened to me talking for a whole segment about Colton Wong last Friday. Right after I published the episode, Wong was traded to the Seattle Mariners. So so much for the idea. The Ken Rosenthal had reported that the Giants were interested in Wong, and I thought he made sense, but he's not a top of the market guy, and there's certainly other players who could fill that role. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. For your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with the local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today is available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Hopefully, I really have a feeling I'm going to be featured prominently on Locked On Sports Today in the next few days. I really do believe that could happen. It's probably not going to involve Bryan Reynolds at this point in time, but Bryan Reynolds is certainly an interesting guy if we know that the Pirates are going to trade him. They have said, they even released a statement after it was reported widely suddenly a couple days ago that Reynolds had requested a trade from the Pirates. But immediately afterwards, we had the Pirates release a statement that said, we're disappointed that this has happened and he's requested a trade, but we don't intend to trade him. And we look forward to him being a big part of the Pirates moving forward. And so there's no guarantee. This isn't really common in baseball for players to request trades like this. They tried to extend him, and I guess they didn't get close. And the Pirates are kind of a disastrous franchise right now. Just refuse to spend any money at all, and they're bad. So, some Giants fans complain about the lack of spending. It is absolutely nothing to complain about compared to teams like the Pirates and the Oakland A's. These teams actually don't spend money, whereas the Giants do. It's just maybe not quite at that level that you want, but hey, in the next few days, that could change in a major way. But anyway, Bryan Reynolds, should the Giants trade for this guy? It depends. It depends on the price. And what I mean by price is the prospect cost, the player capital cost, not the monetary price. What's attractive about Reynolds, I think who the teams that are going to want to, or that would be willing to give up the most for Reynolds would be teams that essentially have some hardline budgetary constraints. Maybe their ownership group is saying we cannot pass the first luxury tax threshold, and say you're already close to that luxury tax threshold. The fact that Reynolds is only going to make, $6.75 million in 2023 makes him very attractive because he's worth far more than that. That's just by nature of him being pre-arbitration. He's in arbitration year number 1, essentially. It's already a guaranteed $6.75 million, and then he has 2 more years of arbitration afterwards. So I kind of quickly estimated that he'll end up making around $30 to $35 million maybe through 3 turns in arbitration, basically. This year was they bought it out last year, but essentially over the next 3 years, he'll earn only around $10 million a year on average, and it's less than that right now. And he's a good player. So, good player who's cost controlled and making less than he's worth, that is attractive to pretty much every team in the game. But my perspective that I came out with and published on Twitter immediately about this is that, like I mentioned earlier, the Giants have such clean books right now. If you look at 2024 commitments, it's $20.5 million. And the Giants should be able to run payrolls of $200 million. I don't see any reason they couldn't be at $200 million. And they'd have $180 million to spend as of right now, looking at 2024 payroll. And then if you look at 2025, all they have committed is the $3.5 million player option of Wilmer Flores. And that, he could decline it, and then it might be zero. $3.5 million is essentially zero. And then, of course, moving beyond 2025, it is zero. And so there's some scenarios where you add an Aaron Judge, you add somebody else, and your payroll suddenly has ballooned to a point where the Giants have some kind of limit. And if they are up against that limit, I think that Bryan Reynolds could make a lot of sense. But say you miss out on Aaron Judge, and so you end up signing, cheaper players. I think that they still pivot to a Carlos Correa, but that only would add a $32 million to current payrolls and future payrolls. So it still doesn't push them to any kind of uncomfortable level. And so the idea is, to me, just sign good players, because when you sign good players, I think that Reynolds, in a lot of ways, is comparable to Brandon Nimmo. They're not the same kind of offensive player. Nimmo is more of an on-base guy, and Reynolds is a little more of a power guy. But it kind of balances out to the point where the offensive production is similarly good. And I don't know, Reynolds, I have some concerns about defense, which I don't really have about Brandon Nimmo. Nimmo remains really fast and has been good defensively in center. Reynolds has been in a decline defensively, and I view him more as a corner guy than as a center fielder. And if he's just another corner outfielder, I don't know. The defense is a bigger deal. I feel like people are saying he's a good defender, but if you look at the numbers and the trend, I tend to look at defensive runs saved, ultimate zone rating, outs above average. The one thing I'm not looking at is fielding percentage, because it is not a good way to evaluate defense at all. Because think about it, it doesn't really care if you have any range at all. You could be the least rangy player in the game and not commit any errors, but you're not a good defender. And so for Reynolds, I don't know. I think that I'm not knocking the player. I think he's a good player, but it would cost a lot in terms of the prospect capital. But if you could find a way to get him, to me, it only makes sense if you've already made a bunch of other high dollar additions to the point where you feel like your budget doesn't really have room, because, they have some kind of limit. We don't know what it is. It could make sense, but I'm not sure it makes sense to move like a Marco Luciano or a Kyle Harrison, who's pretty much, to me, like undoubtedly what the Pirates would be looking for a player this good under team control for 3 more years. And by the way, I'm just getting news that Trey Turner has signed. He didn't sign with the Padres, so that's good news. He didn't sign with the Giants, but again, like I said, East Coast expectation. Trey Turner has signed with the Phillies for 11 years and $300 million. I did not expect him to get that many years. I think the expectation in the industry was more like 8 or 9 years for Trey Turner. When I look at the predictions by ESPN, Fangraphs, and MLB Trade Rumors, Fangraphs predicted 9 years, ESPN predicted 8, MLB Trade Rumors predicted 8, Fangraphs fans predicted 7, and so 11 years for Trey Turner. The fact that it's $300 million, though, that means it's less than $30 million a year. So 300 divided by 11 years is only $27.3 million a year. And so what's happened here, probably for luxury tax purposes, because when you calculate your luxury tax payroll, it's based on the average annual value. And so adding years to reduce the overall AAV. Like when we're talking about Judge, we're talking about AAVs pushing 40. And Trey Turner's only getting 27.7, despite being a really good player. So the Phillies basically decided we'll take on more years, even if those last few years don't look so good, in exchange for that lower AAV. And that makes a lot of sense. You could see Judge getting a 10-year deal. Notably, Trey Turner is younger than Judge. But yeah, we're going to break this deal down a little bit more and also get into the disappointing news about the Hall of Fame and Barry Bonds not getting in again. And it wasn't just that he didn't get in, it was the way he didn't get in that you're not going to want to miss. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But before we do, at Locked On Giants, we believe the home should be where you and your family feel the safest, especially over the holidays. This season, give yourself and your family the gift of peace and protection with the #1 rated home security system, SimpliSafe. And right now, SimpliSafe is offering Locked On Giants listeners 40% off a brand new security system. Don't put this off. I know for me, I was putting it off myself, but there's nothing like the peace of mind being able to check SimpliSafe's app that I find very easy to use, and being able to look on those crystal clear HD cameras at any time. Being out of the house, it's just night and day. I know that I feel now like I couldn't live without it. I couldn't be without the safety and security that I feel when at home, but also when away, to be able to check in and know that things are okay away from home. So SimpliSafe was also named, by the way, the best home security system of 2022 by U.S. News and World Report a 3rd year in a row. Don't miss this chance to save big, 40%, on my favorite security system. Get 40% off any new system at simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb. That's simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. All right, as promised, we're going to keep refreshing Twitter and continuing to talk about these deals. I'm seeing some reactions on Twitter that this is kind of a way over expectation deal. And I don't really think that it is, because the average annual value is much lower than expected, and that he exchanged that for years, because the expectation, like I said, for Trey Turner was 7 or 8 years. I don't really know why he would get 7. I thought 8, maybe even 9, but that it would be 32, 33. I think I even said earlier, 32 million a year. I was talking about Correa. I think people are kind of on the fence about which of Correa and Turner would get more money. And honestly, Correa for 11 years, 300 million, I think would be a solid deal for whoever signs him, because 27 million a year versus what we were thinking, more like 33. Again, though, you're going more years, so you're guaranteeing just as much money. The total prediction, like just to give an example, Fangraphs predicted 9 years, 288 million. So the total money is not that different, 288 versus 300. And so I don't know. I think it's not that surprising of a total at all. It seems kind of right in line. It's just that he exchanged more years for lower average annual value. So where does that leave the Giants? Well, it's one shortstop off the board. And so the teams that want shortstops are the teams that wanted Turner are probably going to pivot to Correa. There's also Xander Bogaerts out there. But if the Giants miss on Judge, like, they're going to need an answer soon, because if Correa is plan B, and look, Scott Boras, Correa's agent, is smart, and he knows, I'm sure the Giants have been clear about this, that they're interested, and especially they know that if Judge leaves, I keep saying leaves, he was a Yankee, not a Giant. I keep acting like he's a Giant. But if he goes back to New York, Boras knows that the Giants are going to pivot to Correa. And so I don't think that they're just going to take Correa off the board before Judge makes his decision. That being said, you need to be prepared to win that bidding war. And so it's going to get really interesting if guys start flying off the board. Xander Bogaerts is not a horrible fallback option. There's still Dansby Swanson as well. Brandon Nimmo would be part of a larger fallback option. But this is the first major position player to fly off the board. Look, he left the Dodgers, right? He was on the Dodgers, and the Padres were interested, and he goes to the Phillies. So this is good news for the Giants in that sense, although, the Phillies are a National League team now, and there's a lot of roads to the playoffs that are not by winning the division. And so the Phillies were actually the team technically that knocked the Giants out of the playoffs by way of being the Giants finished, 7th in the National League, and the Phillies finished 6th. And so, so the Phillies just got that much better. Bryce Harper's going to miss half the year. And so that, in essence, Turner's kind of replacing Harper for half the year, but then Harper comes back, and then they have them both. So anyway, fascinating development. Wouldn't be surprised. I'm going to keep refreshing Twitter as this episode goes on, because at any second you could see this Aaron Judge news come down. Looks like we don't yet have that coming down. I really want to go on Twitter and comment on this deal, but I'll have to wait until we're done here. What I want to talk about briefly is that Barry Bonds was part of this, what do they call it? Oversight committee for players who didn't get elected in by the BBWAA, the Baseball Writers Association of America. There's these committees that the Hall of Fame kind of, I don't exactly even know how they select who ends up for a vote. And I know that the Hall of Fame kind of handpicks these committees, but the committee was made up of 16 people, Hall of Famers, baseball executives, and then like journalists / historians, including Susan Slusser, our very own Susan Slusser of the San Francisco Chronicle. And anyway, one of the players up for election got in. Fred McGriff, the crime dog, got 16 out of 16 votes. You needed 12 out of 16 to be elected to the Hall of Fame. And the crime dog, Fred McGriff, got 16 out of 16. So huge congratulations to Fred McGriff. I was a fan growing up. By all accounts, just a really good dude and just a very consistent, very good baseball player. But Barry Bonds was way better than Fred McGriff and way better than almost any player to ever play this game. And so they did release vote totals. When the player gets less than 4 votes, they just say less than 4 votes. They don't say how many. And that's where Bonds fell in. Less than 4 votes. And so you needed 12. Could have been 3, 2, or 1, or 0. And he got Yeah, I mean, he needed 12. So it's just horrible news if you're like gung-ho on Barry Bonds ever getting into the Hall of Fame. He will be up again for one of these committees, possibly in 2025. Honestly, I'm kind of checked out. I don't know if you can relate. I grew up, Bonds was like a player for the Giants when I was growing up. And so I witnessed it. I was there for 71 and 72. I was there for 756. I've seen in person, I've seen these moments. Bonds was just greatness personified. But in terms of where I stand, that's my age with the Hall of Fame, is I'm jaded by the Hall of Fame. I know a lot of you listening have been around, been baseball fans and been Giants fans much longer than I have. And I think that the Hall of Fame might mean more to you. Let me know in the comments. But people my age and younger, I think, especially in the Bay Area, they don't care so much about the Hall of Fame, and it's largely because of this. But at the end of the day, the system is the system, and there's really not anything we can do. And so I don't get too worked up about it. It is unfortunate. It is hypocritical in a lot of ways that Bonds doesn't get in, even though, like David Ortiz, there was some steroid speculation about him. I think he was named on the Mitchell report. I don't know. I know that there was some possibility that David Ortiz used performance-enhancing drugs, and he gets in first ballot, and Bonds was about twice as valuable as David Ortiz in his career. So doesn't entirely make sense, and it's just another sad day for those hoping that Bonds would get his recognition. I know Willie Mays really strongly feels that he wants his godson Barry Bonds to be elected, and so this is a blow to Willie Mays, and that makes me sad, knowing that it makes Willie Mays sad. So anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Coming up tomorrow, maybe bonkers news. We'll be back with Locked On Giants giving you the latest. The winter meetings are expected to be insane, and so please come back and check us out every day of the week, and if any big news happens, we'll be there to cover it. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. Helps me out a lot, so thanks in advance, and thank you to everyone who's done so already. I cannot wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.